the workshop and the seminars over the past year or so are fairly familiar with the project, the wider project itself, and the roadmap as it's being prepared for Slovenia. So maybe at the beginning, just to inform you all, this meeting will be recorded. So the recording will be made available after the seminar itself. We have Per Olaf. And any kinds of questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. But we'll have Q&A sections throughout today's seminar. So maybe at the beginning, I'll give the word to Michal from Bellona, just to give a brief introduction about the project itself, and then we'll get started with the roadmap itself. So, Michal.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Marco. My name is Michał Wędołowski. I'm working at Bellona Europa, and we are an environmental NGO based in Brussels, and we are also part of the project consortium of the CCS for CEE project. The project started in late 2020, so it's been already about 1.5 years that we're into the project. It's funded by the EEA and Norway grants, and the objective of the project is to build momentum for CCS deployment in the CEE, Central and Eastern Europe region. 11 countries are covered by the project, among them Slovenia. And the idea is to, well, originally, or at the first stage, we aim to take stock of what's been happening in the CCS area in all these 11 countries of the region. So last year we published country reports, CCS assessments in those countries, looking into the current regulatory framework, but also engaging with stakeholders in order to collect their views on what is needed to make CCS happen in Central and Eastern Europe. So, as I mentioned, Slovenia is one of those 11 countries. The other countries are the 3 Baltic countries, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, Ukraine, Croatia, and Slovenia. And so, as far as Slovenia is concerned, we have been working with Marko Maver. So Marko is our associated expert. He's the author of the National CCS Assessment Report published last year, and also the roadmap that we will be discussing today. And I think this project has had an excellent timing in the context, or against the backdrop of the EU developments. We have seen a wave of announcements in the last couple of years with such flagship projects, CCS projects like the Northern Lights project in Norway, the Portos project in the Netherlands, a couple of initiatives in the UK, also in other EU countries, in the Nordic countries. But interestingly, it seems that also our region, Central and Eastern Europe, is also trying to catch up. We have seen some very interesting announcements, for example, by Heidelberg Cement, the German or international cement producer is planning to install a pilot capture installation in Poland. There's also an interesting project to create a CO2 transport hub in Gdańsk on the Baltic coast in Poland. And we've been hearing from other stakeholders in Central and Eastern Europe about other emerging projects, not yet as formalized as those that I mentioned, or not yet announced. But we can see that there is definitely some movement in the CCS area, although this is far from what is required for the region to achieve climate neutrality within the 2050 horizon. So in parallel to this pilot and commercial projects development, there's also very interesting policy landscape and regulatory framework developments taking place in the EU. One highlight that I'd like to share here with the group is the initiative led by the European Commission, which is planning to organize the second annual CCUS forum later this year, building on the success of the forum organized in October 2021. And so the idea is to put together CCS stakeholders to guide the Commission in preparing what was announced as the CCUS vision to be published next year in 2023. So the Commission is planning to form working groups composed of different CCS stakeholders from the industry, from I suppose also from the governments and from the civil society, looking at industrial partnerships, looking at the needs, what is needed to build cross-border EU CO2 infrastructure, transport and storage infrastructure, as well as to guide the work on the vision paper itself. So against this backdrop, I think it's very interesting that we have this project, and we hope to also accelerate CCS deployment in Central and Eastern Europe, so that the region doesn't stay behind, is not left behind in the pursuit of achieving climate neutrality. Today we will have a presentation by Marco, who has authored the CCS deployment roadmap for Slovenia. And we also have a couple of other very interesting speakers, including Per-Olof Granström from Zero Emission Platform, or ZEP. ZEP has been a very, very key instrumental stakeholder platform guiding the European Commission in all things CCS. So we very much hope to bring ZEP as an EU Brussels-based platform closer to the stakeholders in the CEE region. And then we have a couple of presentations from the industry representatives, including Tomasz Vuk from the Slovenian cement producer Salonit, Nico Karpa from Deloitte, and Libo Geremic from Energetika Maribor, the Slovenian heater power producer. I hope I got that right in terms of the sector. So yes, I'm very, very much looking forward to the discussions today. And maybe before I ask Marco to present the roadmap, I just wanted to mention that in September, on the 6th of September, we are also planning to organize a conference in Brussels that will present the findings of this project. And also, as Bellona, we are planning to publish a report that will present the EU-level initiatives that are relevant for the CCS projects, including projects from the region. So please stay tuned, and I hope to see you at the event in Brussels. And in any case, as Bellona, in the coming year, we will be present in Slovenia, trying to help get CCS projects off the ground. So very much looking forward to work with you in the coming months and next year. That's all from me, Marco. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful introduction. I think you've summarized fairly where we are, what the goals are, and what the plans for future are as well. So let me just share the screen real quick. Can you see the presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Okay, so essentially the purpose now is just to go through the policy roadmap itself, through each of how it's structured, different sections, and then answer any of questions you might have. I think if it's probably best if you have any questions, you can write them in the chat, or we can have, answer them afterwards. So essentially the aim of the roadmap, as Michal mentioned, is to kind of create, talking about Slovenia, is to create an enabling environment to deploy CCS project and maybe future project as well. So the roadmap provides an overview of ambitious policy actions that can be taken from R&D to potential commercialization, which would lead ultimately to Slovenia meeting its climate targets. So while the aim is to create essentially an enabling environment, the focus of the roadmap is to enable or how to develop transferable knowledge and skills by national stakeholders. So that's government, research institution, the private sector, in one of the more of the stages along the capture, transport, and storage chain, and to create linkages with across borders and with more experienced stakeholders around the world. It underlines the importance of cross-border activities in joint regional demonstration project, and with the goal to increase also stakeholder access to funding. So the way the roadmap itself is structured, it's in 4 different sections. On the first, it focuses on how to scale up our D&D activities and building national knowledge and experience on various parts of CCS. In the second stage, it focuses on the policy standards and regulations. So what are the different issues and various actions that can be taken in that respect. In section 3, the roadmap focuses on increasing stakeholder engagements, cooperation, and dissemination of know-how. And last, on the various social aspects of CCS and how to harness public support, which we've come to realize it's one of the crucial issues. So each group of actions has a specific name, as I mentioned, and is divided into single sections that could be done by specific stakeholders within a proposed time frame. The time frames are divided into 3 sections, so short-term, mid-term, and long-term, with short-term referring to actions that could be done from now until 2025, mid-term actions that could be done between 2025 and 2030, and long-term actions to be done after 2030. In Slovenia, as the roadmap, you will be presented with the roadmap after this seminar, as it's still being finalized, but majority of the actions are short to midterm. So a lot of actions can be done over the next couple of years by 2025, and this will of course determine how or what kind of future CCS will have in Slovenia. So chapter 2 is structured in just kind of overview about the different opportunities and barriers for CCS in Slovenia. Looking at, for example, the emissions and energy mix, we know that largest consumers of energy are of course transportation and industrial sectors, while electricity generation is evenly supplied by nuclear power, hydro, and coal, with small percentage also coming from solar and natural gas. So the energy intensive industry sector is a significant contributor to CO2, as well as to the overall Slovenia's GDP at about 2.5%. So about half of all CO2 emitted in Slovenia in 2018 came from point sources that could implement carbon capture technologies. Of those emissions, I think out of the energy intensive sector represents about 17% of the emissions, which was about 3 million tons. And the key contributors of these emissions from this sector are cement and aluminum producers, so Salonit and Talum, as well as, of course, in the electricity generation sector, power plant Schorstein. And these three actors are at present hold the most potential for application of CCS technologies in Slovenia. Looking at how the country has thus far approached CCS and CCU deployment, it's quite a mixed history. Some activity started in the early 2000s, late 2008, 2009, with some research activities, which has over the past couple of 6, 7, 8 years stalled. So looking at state level documents that should serve as kind of strategies to drive technology development, CCS and CCU is mentioned in our kind of key documents, which are the National Energy and Climate Plan, the Long-Term Climate Strategy, and the Slovenian Industrial Strategy. So whereas the first two refer to the technologies as potential pathways for Slovenia to achieve carbon neutrality, the latter notes that the technology is proven yet not economically feasible. So this shows us there is a clear need for a strategic approach to CCS implementation and deployment. And as currently the technology lacks political momentum that would kind of spur pilot and demonstration project development and consequently lead to large-scale projects to be deployed. Overall, there is no major legal and regulatory barriers, although the current Environment Act does prohibit CO2 storage in Slovenia. But apart from that, there are no major issues. There is, however, quite a large gap in terms of knowledge and experience in CCS and CCU in Slovenia. So whereas the civil society NGOs view it as unnecessary and expensive tool that would allow for continuation of fossil fuels, there are industry stakeholders, namely Salonit, the cement manufacturer, that see it as one of the key decarbonization tools for the future. And as mentioned, while the technology is mentioned in policy documents, experience does show that employees within the key ministries do not realistically see it as a decarbonization tool, and hence why one of the emphasis is on increasing awareness and knowledge on CCS among policymakers as well. Currently, only Salonit is in the process of developing a pilot CO2 capture project. And there's some research activity within the National Chemistry Institute and some universities on CO2 capture methods, but these are as part of European projects. So there's no kind of actual plans for pilot and project development. Public perception of CCU and CCS is also limited, namely in terms of low awareness of the process itself and low acceptance, so where awareness does exist. However, with effective engagement, I think public opposition from project developers' perspective shouldn't pose a major barrier to project development in Slovenia. There are also no significant infrastructure barriers for CO2 transport, given that CO2 storage is not allowed, complemented by public opposition issues, large of it stemming from mistrust in government policies and experiences with large projects. It is most likely that regional clusters, namely with Italy and Croatia, will determine the level of CCS, CCU deployment in Slovenia. So as mentioned, key barriers are lack of awareness, lack of kind of clear strategy for deployment and financial support, societal and NGO opposition, and potential lengthy permitting and other administrative barriers, which could prove to hold back development of pilot and demonstration projects in particular. So if now we're moving on to the 4 different sections of the policy roadmap, we'll go over through some of the key kind of recommendations and actions to be taken, and then obviously the roadmap itself is more detailed. So one of the recommendations is, of course, to build up knowledge platforms. We mentioned that the awareness of CCS in Slovenia is low. So one of the key recommendations is to create a kind of a platform to share best practice and data and facilitate public and private communication and risk quantification. So in this respect, I think the private sector and the academia should take the lead on these efforts, and then bring also the government actors and NGO communities as well. So in that respect, it would be useful to establish a platform or an advocacy group for CCS through existing mechanism of the Chamber of Commerce, as well as to increase awareness in general. I think creating kind of social interactions through roundtables, conferences, media posts, and also where foreign experts would be presented. This could show a sense of kind of a commitment to a global approach. Slovenia's engagements at the international fora is also fairly limited. So stakeholders, including paysaver companies and academic and research institutions, are kind of encouraged to join various international platforms such as the Zero Emission Platform, Clean Energy Ministerial, Carbon Sequestration Leadership Forum, and so on. Here, I think the government, namely the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning, and as it looks at the moment with the changes in government structure, the new proposed Ministry of Climate Change and Energy. And I think also the private sector here, they must really work together, also in dialogue with neighboring countries on securing kind of an aligned approach for storage, as well as transport infrastructure. As mentioned before, storage of CO2 in Slovenia is highly unlikely to occur. Also important is to identify various industrial hubs and clusters and CO2 transport networks. At the moment, there's no kind of existing industrial hubs per se, as we perhaps see in other parts of Europe. This is mainly due to geographical size in Slovenia. So single point emitters are not excessively far from each other and could still benefit from a cluster approach of a joint CO2 transport infrastructure. And when we're talking about CO2 transport infrastructure, this includes pipelines, but also in particular in the phase of pilot demonstration, project development, other forms of CO2 transport. So whether it's trucks, rail, ships, and barges potentially. I think the ministries and the civil society must acknowledge that development of shared infrastructure is a prerequisite and could, as mentioned, act as a trigger for new private investments. Here also, I think possibilities for waste to energy coupled with CCS in cities is another form of hub and cluster that must be explored further. And as we'll hear from a presentation from Energetika Maribor later on, they have already started to kind of think along those lines. As far as funding and financial support for R&D project, since first movers will of course have higher costs, I think here key will be to initiate pilot and demonstration projects. For testing and technology advancement, the government should provide some form of incentives to mobilize private capital. There's one opportunity here that's encouraged within the roadmap. That's through the Climate Fund. And the research has shown that with a clear kind of policy and financial support, the private sector is much likely to consider investments in carbon capture and then transport and storage as well. Also, one of the recommendations in that respect is to create a single platform that will cover all published tenders that draw from the Climate Fund, regardless of the tenderer that should be established, as well as the government should appoint a kind of a national contact point that would assist Slovenian companies and project developers in applying for and accessing EU and other funds that would facilitate cross-border collaboration. I think these combined would kind of encourage for a much quicker uptake and of development of pilot and demonstration and ultimately commercial sized project. Also, in terms of, as mentioned before, there's currently storage of CO2 is not allowed in Slovenia. However, under the current legislation, it's not allowed, of course, but there should still be some funds made available potentially through the climate fund that would allow for either new storage site location and exploration to give us a more precise information about potential storage locations within the country if potentially at some point the legislation does change. At the moment, I think the estimated storage capacity in Slovenia are about 94 million tons. However, this assessment was made in 2009 or 2010, if I believe, and was not very, very detailed. So if ultimately once infrastructure and projects do develop, if there is interest in storage in Slovenia, this should be done. This should be started now or over the next couple of years. A way to kind of bridge sort of the valley of debt, how to spur private investment, is also I've mentioned the role of the ministry that could play together with other stakeholders. Here, I think the two stakeholders could or should communicate to the European Commission on the need to support developing CO2 transport infrastructure in particular, as far as it relates to non-pipeline modalities. So mentioned rail, barge, and trucks, which would allow these kinds of projects to be eligible for PCI status and CEF funding. Also, I think it's important for the relevant ministries as well as other stakeholders, the civil societies and academia, to kind of visit or monitor the development of kind of the lead projects, which we'll hear later is at this in the Salonit Anhovo site. Moving on to policy standards and regulation. We mentioned that CCS is not extensively included in any national strategic documentation. However, the government should look to follow a number of best practices in other countries in terms of policy making. They're strongly focused on cross-border cooperation. So in that respect, a lot of emphasis within the roadmap is put on developing these kind of cross-border relationships. As mentioned, one of the issues is could potentially be lengthy permitting and administrative barriers. So in terms of, let's say, guidelines and standards to make the process of permitting and financial de-risking of investments easier, international standards could be adopted by national institutions such as the Slovenian Institute for Standardization. However, mainly I think the government should look to include CCS in the national strategic documents, so National Energy and Climate Plan, which is currently being planned for revision in the upcoming year, or even better, kind of as mentioned before, developing national CCS strategy for industrial decarbonization. As there is no national strategy regarding targets for blue hydrogen production, bioenergy CCS, direct air CCS, or waste to energy, I think more effort is also needed to raise awareness and promotion of these kinds of policies, whether through workshop roundtables or other forms of communications. So really to ensure kind of the resilience of these strategies, I think a proposed action is also for a parliamentary group on industrial decarbonization could be created, or at least the importance of CCS should be discussed at the relevant parliament hearing. I think the awareness among policy makers is low, and this should be kind of CCS should be made, should be kept on the agenda as these kind of projects develop and policies do change. Obviously, we know by now that CCS awareness engagement is low and is lacking. So one of the key recommendations is also to create a, as I mentioned, national CCS forum and advocacy group, ideally within the Chamber of Commerce or also as a standalone platform, with particular goal to engage different stakeholders through various types of analysis, which should kind of seek to find a consensus on the importance of CCS for Slovenia. To engage the civil society, digital advocacy should be implemented by the private sector and research institution. And also key for CCS deployment in Slovenia will be, as mentioned, international and regional cooperation. So to launch cross-border projects that will benefit these countries and connect the capture, transport, and storage. Formation of industrial clusters, which is mentioned before, should be promoted by the government. So the focus here should really be on developing transport infrastructure with neighboring Italy and Croatia, and also synergies with developing hydrogen infrastructure should be sought here. Establishing kind of bilateral agreements or memorandums of understanding signed by participating countries could serve as the basis for the development of a stable framework for cross-border cooperation, and that includes standards, funding and incentives, risk sharing, and potential business models. And in this respect, while Slovenia is a signatory of the London Protocol, it hasn't ratified yet Article 6 amendment, which allows for cross-border transport of the CO2 in the marine environment. So one of the kind of recommendations here is that the government should ratify Article 6 amendment, and in the meantime, until the amendment, which requires majority of or 2/3 of the signatories to come effect, it should sign a bilateral agreement with country of destination of the captured CO2. So here particularly referring to Italy and potentially Croatia, which would allow for CO2 to be exported from Slovenia. And lastly, as far as social aspects and public support is concerned, I mentioned a number of times that the awareness is low. So here, one of the recommendations is that a in-depth assessment of climate and CCS awareness, and of course of all that encapsulates, so perceived risks, should be conducted. This could be either by the Ministry of Environment or by research institutions, and then could be funded through potentially through the Climate Fund. Also, energy-intensive industries, here in particular Salonit, should start engagement campaigns to promote CCS in their CO2 capture pilot project. This is going to, I'm sure they are aware of that. This will be particularly crucial, to be started as soon as possible, because once it gets to the project implementation stage and permitting, this could allow for a much smoother process. So I think a specific, as I mentioned before, as a specific CCS presentation could be made to the State Assembly or individual parliamentary groups, which would put and then try to keep the technology on the map. Full transparency and early public engagement is vital. So really project developers here must start community engagement early on, but I think Salonit might say more about this later in their presentation. And as research show, as far as industry stakeholders and governments, I've mentioned that earlier, tend to score lower on trustworthiness in a CCS context. While researchers and NGOs are seeing more trustworthy here, project developers should really partner with consulting companies as well, and NGOs and local communities when communicating that with kind of the wider public. I think this could in particularly help over the long term build trust in the technology itself, and also on proposed policy measures. So that's kind of a brief overview. Maybe kind of, as I mentioned, some of the key steps is, of course, increasing awareness among policymakers, establish a CCS advocacy group, ideally through the Chamber of Commerce, to provide a clear political system, extend the extent to which CCS is mentioned in key strategic documents, increase funding in the Climate Fund for technological innovations, and increase engagement with international fora. So it's participating within platforms such as ZEP, for example. So this is kind of like a brief overview of how the policy roadmap is structured. What are some of the key recommendations? Of course, there are more detailed description within the roadmap itself, which you will receive after this seminar, and can have further look. So this is kind of general overview. So now I think ready for any kind of questions that you might have. So raise of hands, or has the area have any been included in the chat? No, not yet. So any questions about the roadmap or any of the particular policy recommendations? Otherwise, we'll do the kind of the school approach and point to people. First come, first serve. Yes, Michal.
Marco, the fact that the storage is banned, you mentioned there's a very little prospect that could change. Is it because of the geology of the country, or sort of environmental issues? What's the reason for sort of lack of optimism in this regard? And I know it's not just specific for Slovenia. There's a couple of other countries in Europe where this is the case.
I think it starts off with the fact that, I mean, it's a couple of things combined. One is the lack of data available. I mentioned before some initial research has been done into storage capacities back in 2008, 2009, I think, which showed effectively sufficient capacity in Slovenia, but these were very superficial analysis done. So they're not very detailed analysis of the locations themselves, or the geolocations in particular. So that's one. So the availability of concrete data that would allow for more in-depth assessment. And I think second, probably even more important, is public opposition. I think Slovenia is a very small country itself, with strong kind of history of public opposition when it comes to these for kind of infrastructure projects. In particular, the northeastern part of the region, where the largest, again, storage capacities are currently estimated, has a history with natural gas production, which over the past couple of years has been quite intense. And I think for those reasons that it would be very difficult to kind of present these legislative changes, so allowing CO2 storage in Slovenia to occur now. So that's why one of the recommendations is also to include funding for more detailed storage size assessment. And when that is done, and when you can kind of dust settles over the next couple of years, potentially legislation could be changed as well. But I think at this stage, it's still too soon to kind of even propose these kinds of legislative changes, which could raise a lot of, dust again, and prevent pilot and demonstration projects to develop, which are obviously necessary before you start injecting the CO2. It's all about the timing and I guess the history of public opposition in Slovenia. Any other questions? Tomasz, yes.
Yeah, Marco, one question. Let's say this is kind of a proposal for some, let's say, actions related to CCS. How will this fit into, let's say, or what was the idea? How to position this in a frame of overall climate change policy or strategy for Slovenia? How do you think? How we should, let's say, integrate this in this, let's say, more broad picture of the future actions that we need to do.
Or how to go about doing that, or whether that's even feasible?
No, which steps do you envisage to position this, let's say, this proposal, or let's say this roadmap in a general, roadmap for climate change actions overall?
I think the best opportunity at the moment is with the upcoming revision of the National Energy and Climate Plan. So I think here, as I mentioned before, every stakeholder could play their own role in kind of raising awareness on climate action as well as CCS. But here we're talking, is a seminar on CCS. So I think this roadmap could be, let's say, send to representatives from, let's say, political parties or the members of particular committees within the National Assembly. So I think this will be one start. So any kind of conferences that you yourself or myself or others attend could at least kind of push the CCS to out there, so it appears in the media and whatnot. And then also work. I'm sure you will work with the approach, or there will be opportunities to work with the Ministry of Infrastructure, or the upcoming Ministry of Energy or Ministry of Climate Change and Energy, which will be responsible for preparing the updated NECP, and through that give more weight to CCS in Slovenia. I think a strong signal here from the government would be to allow for funding to be made available for these kinds of pilot and demonstration projects. That's kind of step one. But also engaging NGOs, whether that's through conferences or even on an individual basis. I've started as part of this project. I've done some of that work, so to kind of see this is to kind of disseminate the knowledge, and then but this is a continuous process, since memberships in NGOs do change, and if someone new comes in and is not familiar, they're more likely to be to oppose it from the start. Since currently, if you ask someone, it's about CCS, it's like, oh, CCS on the Tesh power plant, it would be too costly, but the story has evolved over the past couple since 2012, since that kind of assessment was made. So I think that's kind of multi-phased approach: conferences, individual engagement, government, including funding for these kinds of projects, and I think that would kind of allow for CCS to really develop in a timely manner, of course. So that's why a lot of these recommendations are short-term based, so between now and 2025.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions? I think we have any representatives from the Ministry of Environment and Spatial Planning? No? Any other questions whatsoever? Like I mentioned, about the recommendations or maybe the actions to be taken? Anna?
Hi, Marco.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Very little, so, or at least my speakers are very low. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I hope you can hear me a little.
Yeah, now you can hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Marco, for this excellent presentation. My name is Anna. I'm actually a representative from the Ministry of the Environment. I think that you really portrayed the state of play in Slovenia in relation to the CCS. And I think you really exposed the situation as it is. And I've heard that you mentioned that for the last time, the assessment of the storage capacity was done in 2009, if I remember correctly. And I wanted to ask you if you know if there are any plans to update this assessment, and if not, who do you think should initiate the assessment, or who has done it for the last time?
I think, yeah, that's a great question. I think the last time it was done as part of it was a European funded project, and I think for Slovenia the lead was, if I'm not mistaken, geoengineering with the Geological Survey of Slovenia. So I think they were the ones who did the study back in 2008 or 2009. So if new activities, or let's say, as I mentioned, one of the recommendations is to try to secure funding for a more detailed storage assessment. This would be kind of the main institutions, along with the Institute Josef Stefan and maybe someone else that this could be done through. But it's only, I think, this all stems from the signal that the government can send to these institutions. you know, if it says that this is something that we are interested in, they're more likely to become engaged. But until this kind of the policy signal doesn't come from the top, it's very unlikely that any kind of assessment will be done. And similar with pilot and demonstration project development are much less likely to occur in a timely manner if there's no strong political signal.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? We have quite a lot of time for Q&A as well, but if not, Michal, maybe perhaps we can, you know, if you think of any other questions, feel free to write them in the chat and we can answer them as we go along. But I think, Michal, now we have also a presentation by Per Olaf. So we can go to that and then continue with Salonit's and Deloitte's presentation as well.
Yes, and also if people feel more comfortable asking questions in Slovenian, that's not a problem. I'm sure Marco can address them as well. And yes, if Per Olaf is ready, we could already give him the floor.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me, and also thank you for the good description and presentation earlier. I will be very pleased to maybe I can fill in some of the gaps and also highlight some of what you presented, Marco, and some of the actions. I will just load my presentation first of all. Let's see if that works.
I think no, he says it's put on hold. Michal?
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's on hold. I suppose Per Olaf is trying to share the slides.
He'll be right back. Excuse me.
Okay.
He'll be right back.
Okay.
Technical issue.
Sure. Any other questions?
But
right.
let's try again. See if it works for this time. Like that, can you now see the presentation?
No.
No, not yet. Are you able to share the screen?
Yes, that is what I'm trying to do. So let's try again.
Okay.
So let's do it like this then. Still no screen.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe then perhaps send it to Hannah and then she can share it, or myself?
That's right.
Should we try that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Okay, I'll try to send it to Michelle here.
I can also share it in your stead, Per, if that works.
Yes, please try it. That would be great, Marilla.
Okay, I'll be sharing that second. Okay, you have the presentation now on your screens.
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So once again, thank you for inviting me. My name is Per-Olof Granström. I am Swedish and I am in Brussels since 15 years. I lead the operational work in the zero emissions platform and also in another platform where we work on research and innovation on CCS and CCU, and I will come back to that. I will highlight a couple of things that you brought up in your presentation, Marco, and I will also describe a little bit on how we work, and I will be very happy to take any questions afterwards. Next slide, please. So the zero emissions platform, very briefly, it is a technology and innovation platform under the European Commission set plan. We are the advisor on CCS and CCU to the European Commission. It started out as a technical advisor, but we can see that given the Green New Deal, more and more of the hurdles and the challenges are actually in the political economy. So it's very, very broad. The membership in the zero emissions platform is everything from oil and gas, industry, utilities, equipment suppliers, researchers, even unions, and also environmental NGOs. So it's a very interesting and broad membership in order to discuss and work very closely with the European Commission on all these matters. And of course, given Michel's presentation earlier, Bellona is one of the NGOs here. So we coordinate very well with many other, both European, national and international level programs, and I will come back to a couple of these. Also very interesting, we see ourselves as the go-to organization in order to cooperate with the Commission, and I will say a couple of words about that. But we also have a very good cooperation with the member states' governments. Next slide, please. So very simply put, it's a structure. Approximately 350 people around Europe are directly, actively engaged in the work on a, let's say, a weekly or a daily basis. And if you click the next slide as well. So the structure is set up with an advisory council, and that is an open board meeting. So everything we do in this platform is open and transparent in order to bring as many as possible on and to spread the information and share information as much as possible. We have an advisory council executive committee that meets up every month when the advisory council doesn't meet. So the advisory council meets 4 times a year. Very interesting. We have this government group. So 3-4 years ago, we could see that this was the UK, the Norwegian, and the Dutch governments. Now we have some 20 governments from all over Europe participating, and this is one of the really interesting things that we can come back to later on regarding Slovenia as well. We have networks where we work with technology development, policy and economics, of course, and we are also opening up a new network because there are so many CCS and CCU in Europe that we really need a new network or committee in order to discuss developments, to discuss barriers and problems and challenges when you have a project, and also exchange information between the projects. Looking at the technology development, we are producing fact-based reports in order to help the Commission to developed CCS and CCU forward. And here are just a couple of the reports that we have delivered over the last couple of years. So CO2 shipping, extremely important, since the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure is the basis in order to make this possible from a European perspective. Guidance for CO2 storage, CCS in biodiversity is something we work on right now, and also CCS in clean flexible power. We are working on a lot of these issues, and you can find all these reports on the website, and I'll be happy to guide you further regarding that. Of course, we have a lot of working groups under the networks, focusing very much on these reports, but also based on the EU policy agenda, the most important items that are on the agenda, so we can help the Commission moving forward. We also have the External Relations Group and a comms working group that is working on the outreach and also to coordinate activities in Europe, in Brussels, but also in the separate countries in order to help the development as much as possible. That's a short overview, and I will come back to a couple of these items as we go. Next slide, please. So just a short couple of slides looking at the history, so we get that right. You all know the background. Starting in 2005, the ZEP started, and of course it was very interesting with these six demonstration plants all around Europe. Everything was about CCS on coal-fired plants, and that time it was a silver bullet, as you remember. Of course, things changed. The renewables came very, very strongly, and I just brought in from 2015 just to see how difficult it is with policies. So in 2015, at the same time as the EU ETS had a price under 10 euros per ton, the RES subsidies in Italy, in Spain, and in France, they were all between 500 and 700 euros per ton, which makes it very, very difficult to go forward, of course. Next slide, please. Luckily enough, we had the signature and the Paris Agreement, and to the right, the Commission was very clear going forward, looking into the need for CCS and also for removals in order to reach the target. Here, the Commission highlighted that we need to store some 600 million tons in 2050, and also highlighted the CDRs. Next slide, please. This is just to show you where we are also on a global and on a European level. On the top level, of course, the IEA's net zero by 2050, looking into 7.6 gigatons per year stored, and of that 2.4 gigatons that will be stored by CDR like BECCS and DACCS. Below, you can see a study that we commissioned with the UCL in London, where they highlighted the extreme need for a CCS industry in Europe. They looked at all the studies on a global and a European level and looked at the abatement of CCS, first of all. So 1 gigaton per year in 2050 was the median that they came up with, and also a really huge investment needed in order to make this possible to 2050. Of course, both CCS and CDR will be needed in order to reach this target. Next slide, please. So just to finalize here on the background, I think it is crucial to highlight what it is all about before we dig into this. Of course, it is about decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions at the same time as we have a strong development in the GDP. And here you can also see the strong importance of both CCS and, of course, CDR in order to have this net zero by 2050. So I will highlight a couple of things to see the very, very strong positive momentum we can see for CCS and CCU in Europe. And I will also say a couple of words regarding what is important right now, the funding and Repower EU. So next slide, please. First of all, to the right, you can see the zero emissions platforms map on CCS and CCU projects covering the whole value chain, and it's hugely important and very urgent to deploy, to demonstrate, first of all, during the 2020s, to make the technologies investable and to scale up. And the Commission is also, of course, very, very clear in what is needed here. Since everything, as we've heard before as well, is very focused around the North Sea, the CO2 transport infrastructure is key here in order for all emitters across Europe to reach safe storage. And just to highlight that, of course, it's pipeline, but the shipping will be extremely important to start off with. And of course, there will be all sorts of transport, also barge, truck and train in order to make this possible. Next slide, please. So the European approach to CCS, as we know, is cross-border. Everything is about setting up a non-discriminatory, open access CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. And we have seen so many interesting MOUs and cooperations set up. In this case, very focused on Norway with the EU, with the UK, with Flanders, Belgium, with the Netherlands, and also with Germany. And of course, the Northern Lights projects in Norway and the Portus project are the basis and the starting point for the development here. We heard about the London Protocol before, and since it will not be ratified very soon, these bilateral agreements will be very, very important. And there are so many other items that needs to be set up between the governments. So the governments will really be key here. And there are many items ongoing in both policy and funding, and we will just take a look at a couple of them. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into it, but in detail, I will be happy to come back bilaterally with any one of you to discuss this further. But of course, on the infrastructure, we have the 10-year regulation, but there is more needed. We believe that there is a new and a real regulation regarding CO2 transport infrastructure. We can come back to that. Everything regarding the Fit for 55, many of these items include CCS and CCU, and it's going in the right direction as the negotiations are going on at the moment. Regarding the hydrogen and gas package, we had hoped that CO2 infrastructure would be part of this, but regrettably, it will not. We heard Mikael talk about the CCUS forum, very, very important to have this also official from the Commission, and ZEP has would like to to host both working groups on vision or strategy and on the CO2 infrastructure. Let's hope we will be able to do that to drive this forward. The certification scheme on CO2 on CO2 removals also extremely important, and we are waiting for the Commission to come back with a proposal at the end of the year. Storage, we have already talked a little bit about. Taxonomy makes a very good basis for CCS and for CO2 infrastructure. And finally, the Repower EU, and I will say a couple of words about that as well. Next slide, please. So you have all seen, and we all know what it's about. So after all the other crises that the Commission have gone through, we have the energy crisis following the invasion of Ukraine. And of course, there are a lot of proposals here, everything linked to the possibility to end the EU's dependency on Russian fossil fuel, to start with on the gas side. More renewables, a very strong focus on renewable hydrogen, a special fund, a special funding part regarding the innovation fund. Very crucial here is to see to it that we don't react short term here, but that we have a long term and predictable framework in order to make this right. We can see that here there are several challenges, especially regarding creating technology neutrality, both regarding, especially I would say, regarding the development of hydrogen and the blue hydrogen that is needed in order to kickstart the clean hydrogen economy. Next slide, please. A couple of words regarding the funding. From the left, on the research side, the demonstration in the middle with the innovation fund, and on the right-hand side, the commercialization. And here I've highlighted the CEF funding. But next slide. So on the left-hand side, Horizon Europe, very interesting development where we can see quite a lot of focus with calls for proposals in the next work package that we are expecting any day now, both on transport, CO2 transport, but CCU and CDR. Partnerships, of course, we have been very active trying to help the Commission to, especially the clean energy transition partnerships, to include also CCS and CCU here. Mission innovation is going on, led by, in the CDR example, by the US, Canada, and Saudi Arabia, and we are participating to support the Commission also here. And we have the upcoming, ongoing, but where we are expecting more work to be done in the EU, US, CCUS cooperation. On the right-hand side, or more on the commercialization side, I would say very, very interesting on the CEF funding. You have seen the 10E regulation, first of all, that is the basis where storage is now included. A lot of projects of common interest focused on CO2 infrastructure, and we are expecting the next 6th list during next year. Next slide, please. Finally, just to highlight that the Innovation Fund, of course, crucial here. We are looking at not 10 billion euros, that was the starting point, but with the very high price on the EU ETS, maybe some 30 billion. And the next call that is coming later on this year will be a bigger link to the Repower EU. What we would like to see here is to front load the Innovation Fund as much as possible in order to get the innovation, the investments as early as possible. Next slide, please. So just to finalize, we would like to see a strategy for CCS and CCU from the European Commission. This would fit very well with the hydrogen strategy and the energy system integration strategy. And we have highlighted here that it's crucial, and the basis is the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. Of course, mapping of storage is crucial, and to coordinate, to have coherence in funding and so forth. But CO2 infrastructure will really be crucial, and also to have clear targets going forward. And this is something that we are expecting now with the CCUS. For next slide, please. Just one word regarding the platform where we are working on research and innovation. Here, Zero Emissions Platform is chairing this together with the Netherlands and Norway, and we will present a lot of reports over the coming weeks, and we have highlighted new targets that sets a target for 50 megatons per year in 2030 in Europe, and we have also produced a roadmap, and I would recommend you to have a look at that. How do we make it possible to be where we need to be in 2030 to reach net zero by 2050? Everything from R&I, business models, and policy developments. And the final slide, please. Just to say that we can see the need, and this is very broad, an enabling policy framework, so it will be economically feasible to invest in all these technologies. The funding must be coherent and coordinated. We need to continue to support CCUS R&I with Horizon Europe and the partnerships. Political recognition is very, very important here going forward. And finally, an EU strategy with a specific focus on CO2 infrastructure is very much needed. I would be very happy to take any questions, and I hope you have some after this. So thank you very much.
That was a great presentation. Thank you so much for that and attending. I think it's important for other attendees to hear kind of the broader context and approaches as well. So I had a question. I think what you said about creating kind of a long-term predictable framework, that's absolutely key. And like on the last slide, you mentioned raising political recognition. From what you've heard from the roadmap presentation, so kind of for Slovenia, do you think these are kind of the right approaches? So contacting political groups, trying to secure funding, is that the right approach, or is there anything else that you would suggest adding?
So I would. So what is important here? I think it is very important to coordinate and discuss with other countries that are in the same position. So at least what we can see. So I think you're right. I think that is very important. But I would also recommend to coordinate and to talk to the other governments that are in a similar situation. We have seen a huge development over the last couple of 3, 4, 5 years, where so many countries have become interested and also changed their minds, like the Danish government and the Swedish government that have really changed their minds over the last couple of years. And now they have strategy, they have targets, they are setting up center of excellences for CCS and so forth. And here I would be very happy as well to invite to both the ZEP government group, because I think that is great in order to hear what are other people doing, what are other governments doing. Am I alone in this? Of course you're not. So I think that would be a good compliment at least.
And just to kind of follow up to that, Do you know, has ZEP had any plans or has issued any kind of proposals to the upcoming Czech presidency about raising CCS higher on the agenda? I know I'm asking just because I know there is the informal ministerial meetings in Prague in about 2 or 3 weeks. So maybe there is a kind of an opportunity for these countries to kind of voice that, or at least try to put it on the agenda.
Oh yes, definitely, and there are many things, but I think it starts very much with the strategy for CCS and CCU. Many of the items are linked to that. I think it follows very clearly from the work that this mandate in the Commission has highlighted regarding creating a vision and presenting a vision for CCS and CCU next year, and so I think it links very well. I think that is the basis for the development.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Michal,
Yeah, thanks a lot, Per-Olof. Thanks a lot. It was really a great overview. If a Slovenian industrial company or any other country for that matter wanted to join ZEP, what should they do? And actually, what do you see as the biggest added value for such companies in joining ZEP?
Yes, I think it's a very good idea. I think one of the things is, of course, to coordinate and discuss with other companies who are in the same situation, and it is difficult. There are so many difficult decisions to be made regarding the strategy, how to set it up, and so forth, and not to speak of when it comes down to the projects themselves. So the first question, please make contact with me or with Mikael or anyone in order to, and we will be very happy to set up a call or a meeting to discuss further how we can do this. We're also happy to give you contacts with companies who are involved in the ZEP work, so you can hear it from them as well. That is normally very important. So the second question, what is really important here? Well, first of all, as I said, to exchange information, to hear what is going on, to follow the development, to see what other companies are doing here. So all of these things, of course, but also to participate in the work helping the Commission. And I think that is even more important when we are looking at the south and eastern part of Europe that are, I would say, totally dependent on the European project that is to set up the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure. So I believe there are many benefits for joining ZEP and cooperating with ZEP. And I would also invite anyone who would like to participate in a network meeting on technology or on policy and economics, or the advisory council meeting. The next meeting will be on the 14th of September. You are more than welcome to join, just to see what it's all about and what we're talking about. And if there are any government representatives as well, I will be very pleased to invite you to the ZEP government group. I think it's a safe haven. So we have created a group where the governments can meet by themselves in order to exchange views. So So I believe that that is a very, very good basis also for the needed development.
Thank you.
Tomasz, yeah.
Yeah, thank you also from my side for this great presentation, and perhaps also you presented a chart, a map of Europe, where there was let's say projects mostly concentrated in the northern part of Europe, and the rest of Europe was more or less empty. And we could observe such a pattern also on some other, let's say, on some other technologies. So the question is why this is happening, and what can be done to somehow encourage also the other parts of Europe to develop faster in this regard? Because I think that at the end of the day, if we as Europe want to compete towards other places, we need to connect the full network in Europe.
Yes, thank you. I believe that the starting point of your question, I believe that, of course, one of the reasons is that we heard about the 9 countries in Europe who have prohibited CO2 storage. So that is, of course, part of the solution here. And then also that it is much easier to discuss storage that is offshore, regardless of what we are talking about. People are, as you know, we heard Marco say a couple of words regarding the social dimension, and people are afraid of storing things regardless, and that's why it started out, of course, where it's very possible to store. We have also seen that the development of storage onshore is quite slow. The Commission is updating their report every 2 years, so it is slow. And you're totally right. It is all about the CO2 transport and storage infrastructure, and we are doing everything we can, and we are trying to engage with the whole of Europe. We are trying to help the Commission to understand that this is a European project, and I think that we need to push even harder. We also need help from the governments in order for the Commission to understand how important this is. But I think we need to continue pushing on. And if you have specific proposals on what we should do, I would be happy to discuss this further with you.
Yeah, thanks. It was meant to open this discussion, to raise this question, because I think we need to search for further development in that regard.
Yes. Good talk. You're right.
Okay, thanks. That's why I think since we're running a bit behind time, maybe we should give, if someone has more questions, they can try to answer them towards the end. And maybe, Michal, if you agree, give the floor to Tomasz now for his presentation, and then Deloitte as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. I will try to share my presentation. Oh, no. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's try to put this once again. Can you see it?
Just your screen. I mean, just yourself.
This doesn't work.
Ah,
No.
there it is. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Good. Okay, I will shortly present the, let's say, the roadmap that we designed for carbon neutral cement production in our cement plant. And I would just like to start maybe with the slide that is representing the importance of cement and concrete in the modern society. You can see we somehow consume some 10 cubic kilometers of concrete every year. And this is by far the most used material. And this, let's say, growth has developed over the last 100 years. So in a very short period, the youngest of these basic materials that are used for construction. And we see how dominant this material is. It's basically more or less local. Stones or gravels are moved maybe up to 50 kilometers from the source. It's fully recyclable, and also when we compare to other materials in terms of energy and CO2 intensity, it's rather low intensive material. But because of the scale of usage, still represents some then 6 to 8% of man-made CO2 emissions yearly. Therefore, it's important that we really address the, let's say, the actions to make this process carbon neutral. Because of the let's say the advantages that we have with concrete, we believe that in the future will play even more important role. And if we can make this material carbon neutral, then even if you compare it to wood, there are not much advantages of wood anymore. So we started, let's say, this roadmap with these assumptions and the knowledge of importance of these steps, and we designed this road from now to 2035, when we would like to be CO2 neutral. And we said, okay, let's start with the technologies that are well developed and that can give us a step forwards. So we designed, let's say, short-term activity plan till 2025, where with the, let's say, set of actions, we could reduce our CO2 footprint for approximately 10 to 15%. And then we would use all the available classical technologies in cement production process that enable the reduction of CO2 footprint. This is composed of turning, let's say, the electricity or the power that is being used in our process to renewable sources. Then replace the classical fossil fuels with the fuels produced from waste materials, and then also to introduce some, let's say, materials from demolitions of old buildings and from some other industrial processes to use them as a source of raw materials for cement production. Because you should know that in our process, 2/3 of the emissions of CO2 are coming from raw materials and 1/3 from the energy. And then we said, okay, let's start then after this first period to introduce some pilot plans to test the technologies that will be eventually used for carbon capture and storage or carbon capture and usage. And we plan to do that between 2026, 2028. Depends on some factors, but let's say this is for now our intention. And then during, let's say, during this test phase, we would like to further develop or let's say optimize the technologies that can be used then for full industrial scale application of carbon capture and usage or storage. Maybe just on the next slide, I'm presenting the development over the last 15 years, where we already, with the energy efficiency and change of fuel structure, we were able to reduce the carbon footprint for roughly 20%. And on the next chart, I'm just presenting what can be reached with further, let's say, implementing these available or fully developed technologies that are already tested also in other European cement plants. And we see that we can, with the fuel structure and introduction of this raw materials from recycling, that we can reach further decrease in CO2. That is rather important step. And with that, we will be then among the, let's say, the most developed cement production in Europe and also worldwide. So for the next step, we have started with the feasibility studies for carbon capture technology and also for carbon usage and carbon storage. And for carbon storage, I will not spend too much time because Deloitte will present the findings of this feasibility study afterwards. For carbon usage, we tried to, let's say, figure out what are the possible technologies, what are the things that could work. And then we focused on the hydrocarbon production using hydrogen. Maybe just a bit about the scale. You can see that for carbon capture, only for the carbon capture plant is foreseen from nowadays perspective for full-scale installation an investment of between 200 and 300 million euro. This is the same range like you have for greenfield cement plant, let's say, without carbon capture. So it's a huge capex needed. And also depends on the technology. This will double the energy needs for cement production. So this is the challenge of the carbon capture. Then for the storage and capture, our calculations are, let's say, showing that the costs of this carbon capture plus storage is in the range of 150 to 200 euro per ton of CO2. And we know that right now the cost of allowances in ETS scheme is below 100. So here we need, let's say, an appropriate business model that we can start with these steps. On the other side of carbon usage, the biggest challenge is to have enough green hydrogen that is at an appropriate price. And Also there we are talking about big CapEx expenditures, and I think it's a good potential that we can use this CO2 as a raw material in the future, but it will not be a short-term solution because many steps have to be done in between. And therefore, I believe that for a certain period, both technologies will work in parallel, and perhaps one day when we designed a full network of, I don't know, carbon pipelines over the Europe, connecting sources and utilization plants, then maybe we can have an open market of these solutions. Let's say the vision, is that we go from the, let's say, linear production to circular production, where on the one side we capture CO2, use it as a raw material to produce hydrocarbons. These hydrocarbons are then used for polymers, and polymers for plastic products or rubber products. After, let's say, recycling, reusing, and many cycles of this, let's say, using of these materials, eventually some of this material will end as waste material that can be used as a source of energy in cement production. So we have a closed circle, and if we use green hydrogen to run this circle, then we turn the cement production from, let's say, fossil energy to renewable energy and to fully circular process. On the other side of this, let's say, circularity, we have the raw materials that are now, let's say, sourced from the quarries and then put into a production. Then we build buildings or infrastructure with this material. And the problem of this, let's say, circle is because the lifespan of buildings and infrastructures are 100 years and potentially, or let's say, hopefully more. And concrete is just a bit more than 100 years old material. So, we are under half of this circle right now. And also there are some other barriers, but I think sooner or later we can overcome this. But at the end of the day, if we can close this circle, then we don't have any more CO2 emissions from the process emissions, from decarbonizing limestone in our case. So this is the idea, and therefore we would like to also, let's say, go to these pilot installations to show and to demonstrate that this is actually possible, and then to learn together with some partners how to do the first steps in that direction. Maybe just a bit more details about this, let's say, carbon usage. Maybe only for your information, we are also investigating in putting in place a pilot or, let's say, demonstration plan for green hydrogen production to support the needs of this hydrogen in pilot plant for carbon usage. And then also, it's a minor part in our case, but we like also to develop the usage of hydrogen in the transport of cement to the end customers. An advantage is, of course, because these, let's say, trucks or vehicles are coming always back to the same point to load the cement. So with a restricted amount of infrastructure, it could cover this and support this transport. So in short, the description of what we are planning and where we are. We are now in the stage where we, let's say, finishing this feasibility studies, and now after, let's say, before summer, we will have this overview, and then we will somehow design the appropriate next steps to execute this roadmap to the new treatment production. Okay, thank you, and I'm welcome to any questions.
Thanks for this, Tomasz, for this presentation. Any questions, or since we are running quite a bit behind, so maybe, Michal, do you think if we good for Deloitte to give their presentation and then take questions on both, perhaps, to Tomasz and...
Okay.
Yes,
Nico?
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So
Nico,
I'll close it.
Are you able to share the screen, Nico?
Yes, let me try, but perhaps we need to close this one first.
Where can I close this one? Stop presenting.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, here we are.
Here we go. Can you see my presentation?
Okay, excellent.
Marco, can we see my presentation?
Yeah, looks good.
Very good, very good. So warm greeting to everyone from myself and from our team at Deloitte. So I'm going to very briefly present some of the outputs of the feasibility study that we're currently doing for Salonit Anchovo that Dr. Vuk mentioned previously. My name is Nico. I'm a senior consultant at Deloitte working primarily on sustainability. What I'm going to do in these 5 minutes, I'm going to show you, outline the approach that we developed for this study, and then show you some of the results that we developed. Now, these results will be quite high level and limited. For obvious reasons, the project is still ongoing. We can't disclose anything, but still we think it will be quite interesting and informative because it will be focused on the potential for carbon storage in the region, which might be relevant for our client. So just to outline the project, so Dr. Vuk mentioned that Salonit wishes to become carbon neutral by 2035. Our mission is really to help them do that. And CCS will play, as you have heard, a key role in that. And so therefore we were hired basically to scan Slovenia and the region and the broader region for options for storing the carbon captured at Salonit Anchovo to try to map out the ways it can be transported to the storage sinks. And then in the next phase also to assess the economic implications of that and scan the literature and our context and so on, for just to gather as many information as we can so that we can empower the team at Salonit to make a well-informed decision in light of the obvious uncertainty and the lack of developing projects in the region. We also discussed this previously. So as I mentioned, the scope of the project is really on the transport and capture side of things. We approached this in kind of 3 ways. So first we looked at kind of the internal capabilities of the client. We did a study on the regulation in Slovenia and beyond, and this is where Marco, of course, played a key role. We also focused heavily on the public acceptance of CCS, which was already described, and also here we, of course, leaned very heavily on the great work that was done by Marco and other experts in the CCS for CE project. And the second part, then we did the kind of the nitty-gritty work. We scanned the literature and so on for to locate storage sinks and try to envision how a large-scale CCS operation would look like. And then in the last part, The financial team at Deloitte is doing a financial analysis, the cost-benefit analysis. We're also looking at kind of environmental implications of CCS. And so all of this together will form kind of the backbone of the study that we'll hand in to our client. So now, before I show you any results, just a short disclaimer. All of the data that I'm going to show on the storage sinks and so on, this is all publicly available. This comes from credible, mostly scientific sources. Again, a lot of it is from the reports that were done through the CCS for CE project. So a lot of synergies in the room today. So how we approached mapping potential storage sinks. So you have heard that storage in Slovenia is not allowed. Therefore, we decided to focus on neighboring countries. So on Italy, Croatia, and Hungary. Austria, we did not look into because it seems that the storage capabilities there are also quite limited, and there doesn't seem to be many ongoing projects in terms of storage. So the criteria we used to locate these storage sinks was, well, first, there has to be some obvious source confirming their existence. In terms of the types of sinks, we focused both on onshore and offshore storage. We decided to only look into used oil and gas fields. Saline aquifers are, of course, a big opportunity, but most likely the time frame for their development is even longer, because we are looking at, as Dr. Vuk mentioned, kind of post-2030 as the start of such operations. Proximity to Salonit Anhovo, which you can see marked in the red dot on the map on the right-hand side. We checked that there is sufficient capacity in these storage sinks, that they are kind of connected, at least in some ways, to transport routes. Regulatory barriers, of course, are a key factor. When we will discuss, for example, shipping, keep in mind that the London Protocol is not ratified, so the amendments, so this is something that would obviously need to happen in the future for this opportunity to come true. Last but not least, or before last, the commercial opportunities. So of course, for us, it's very important to locate and scan for such storage opportunities that might actually be available for commercial cooperation to our client. And last, the presence of emission clusters, which I'll describe in a second. But if you look at the map here, so these are basically the 4 groupings of storage sinks, and these form the 4 scenarios, the 4 core scenarios that you will present. So we're looking at offshore storage in Italy, offshore storage in Croatia, both in the North Adriatic, and then 2 onshore options in used gas fields in kind of Croatia, North and Central Croatia, and Southwest, Southeast Hungary, both of them regions where extensive gas extraction took place in the future, in the past, and to some extent also in the present. Now, going back to the emission clusters, which I mentioned, one very useful step when deciding which storage sinks are useful is to look at the concentrations of emitters. Why is this? Because, as you might know, economies of scale can play a huge factor in reducing the costs of transport and of storage, but primarily transport. Obviously, these costs are at the moment still quite high, and therefore any kind of cooperation we can locate could be immensely useful in terms of presenting a business case for CCS for Salonit. So what we did is we used the European Environmental Agency's data on industrial emissions. We put them on a map. The size of the column shows the amount of emissions, and we can see some really interesting things. For example, that Salonit is located in a certain quite large concentration of industrial emitters. So for example, while Salonit Anhovo, as you've seen, emits 0.7 megatons of CO2 per year, this whole cluster in the circle that you see in the black circle, I think emits about 4 megatons per year, which of course is quite a difference. And then there are obvious concentrations in industrial centers in North Italy and Istria, around Budapest, and so on. But going back to the scenarios, I'm going to briefly outline each of them and discuss kind of what are the pros and cons. So looking at Italy, this is no secret. There is a CCS project being developed there called the Ravenna CCS Hub. It's located near the coast of Ravenna. Still quite far, of course, from Salonit Anhovo, but well connected because there all three options are available. There are railway lines marked on the map with the black line. There are pipeline corridors which could be exploited. Of course, no CO2 pipelines yet. These would need to be built or retrofitted. And there's also the possibility of shipping. The theoretical capacity of this storage sink is quite high, and the plans are to develop about 10 megatons per year of storage by 2030, and this project is in development. Of course, when we talk about shipping, I should mention that each time we talk about shipping, there also needs to be some consideration given into the transport from the facility to the port, which in our case could mean 50 or even more 80 kilometers of pipeline or some other mode of transport. The second scenario focuses on used gas fields in the North Adriatic, kind of close to the city of Pula. Again, the transport connections are quite similar along the Istrian coast. There are some other cement plants, some thermal plants, which could be who might be interested in cooperation. Of course, this is purely theoretical at this point. The storage sink's capacity is about 30 megatons. There are no ongoing developments confirmed. However, due to the distance, this is one opportunity that might be developed in the future. When I say it might be developed, of course, this is purely theoretical. It doesn't really represent the views of Deloitte that this sink will be developed or should be developed. You're merely trying to highlight the options that might be useful and available to our client in the next couple of years. Moving on to the regions in central and kind of north-central Croatia and the region of Međimurje. These are also used gas fields. Some of them are already used for CCS, but mostly for enhanced oil recovery operations, most of them on a quite small scale. The distance is a bit longer, so 300 to 400 kilometers. Again, the railroad option exists. However, a very long pipeline will need to be constructed to reach these fields, and their overall capacity in Croatia in these regions is also quite high. And last but not least, Hungary, which is obviously located the furthest away from our client. We are talking now about 500 to 700 kilometers. Again, railway connections are available. A very long pipeline will need to be built. And the overall capacity estimated in used gas fields in Hungary is also similar to Croatia, so about 150 megatons. All of these data is, however, relatively old. So to kind of bring it to the end, so what you saw now is a very high-level presentation of the options that exist. The next step that we did is, of course, look into the cost implications of different transport routes, the operational implications. So, for example, when we present very long railroad connections for a very large quantity of CO2, of course, we should keep in mind not only the cost implications, but also the sheer amount of trains that would be needed to transport such large quantities, and therefore the focus is usually on pipelines for such long distances. So I'm going to conclude here so that we have some time for questions and answers. Just if anyone is interested in more in knowing more about the project or what we do at Deloitte, here are our contacts. We are available, email, phone, so contact us. We're also always happy to talk. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nico, for the great overview, I think. Any quick questions for Tomasz or Nico? Then we also have a presenter from Energetica Maribor, but we've already almost, I mean, essentially run out of time, but I think we can extend it for a few minutes. Michal, right?
It's fine with me, so it depends on people's availability today.
Okay. So any questions for Nico or Tomasz? No? Okay, Marco Bacher. He's asking what kind of technologies you are considering. I'm assuming this is a question for Tomasz. So what kind of capture technologies?
Actually, we did, let's say, a screening of different kinds of technologies. And more in detail, we are actually working on a physical absorption technology for carbon capture. And of course, there are others. We see here some advantages because it's in principle, it's a simple technology. The drawback is a big amount of heat that you need for, let's say, the deabsorption of CO2 absorbed on this physical trap.
Okay. Anyone else? If not, then maybe give the word to Mr. Germic from Energetica Maribor, if he's with us, or I think he might, one of his colleagues might be attending. Mr. Germic, are you with us?
Hannah, I think we need to unmute. Yes, we need to unmute.
Okay, thank you very much.
There you go.
We participate all the time. Okay, I'm joining you a little bit later on because I have some other obligations. But anyway, thank you that you have opportunity to be a part of this webinar. And because we are already a little bit late, I will just proceed with my presentation. It's okay?
Yeah.
Can we share the presentation?
Yeah, I think I said I will share it for you. Just a second.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For the introduction, I would like to say that Slovenia is known for its heavy industry, which together, shall I? Okay, do you want to see me? Okay, that's me. Thank you very much. Yes, for the introduction, I would like to say that Slovenia is known for its heavy industry, which together with the energy sector is the largest emitter in the country, emitter of the CO2, of course. With the growth of emission coupons prices, these two industries will be the most affected in terms of additional cost and will be forced to at least consider intervening of the CO2 technology. So far, we do not have any proven and commercially used technology for the capturing CO2 from industrial plants in our country, but there are quite a few companies that are seriously monitoring this issue and intend to use it in the future. For example, Salonit Anho gave us the two presentations for another company, Talon Aluminium Production and Slovenian steel industry. Can we go to the first slide? I would like to present what we are doing in Energetica Maribor. Can we shift to slide number 2?
This one?
No, this is the first one.
Ah,
Next one.
or is it a bit delayed?
We don't see any. Oh,
Yes,
now
of course. Okay, just a brief introduction about what we are doing in Energetica. With more than 40 kilometers of district heating network, Energetica Maribor supplies heat energy to more than 13,000 households and other consumption points. The company has 40 years of tradition, knowledge and experience in the production and distribution of heat. Our production has 107 megawatt of heat power and 18 megawatt of electrical power. With our production and 48 employees, we are reducing energy poverty while also striving for solutions that will have a positive effect on the environment. Can we go for the next slide? The current situation in Energetica Maribor about we are mostly on fossil fuels, natural gas. Can we go further on for the next slide?
Can you hear it? Can you
No.
see the?
That's it. Okay. I think that we should go to the third slide, not for the fifth. We skip from second to fifth. Maybe we can go a little bit.
This one?
There's a bit of a delay, I guess, when
Okay.
you change slides. So we are still on slide 5 on the screen.
I'm on slide 3, so production structure in the
Yes.
ENV group. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, it's on slide 3 now.
This is the short delay to switch from one to another slide, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I will proceed.
Okay.
The production of Energetica Maribor is locally separated in two places. This is very important. An energy efficient district heating system is achieved through a combination of different energy production. That means 56% of all heat produced is produced by cogeneration engines. Last year, they produced around 71 gigawatt hour of heat and 77 gigawatt hour of electricity. Especially in the winter, our gas boilers are also active, with which we produce 55 gigawatt hour of heat in 2021. We have also solar receivers with 140 kilowatts of thermal power installed on the roof of the building, with which we produce roughly 60 megawatt hour of heat. Okay, can we go one behind to the? Can we shift to the slide number 4 instead of? Okay, yeah. Maybe. Okay, yeah. Current status of CO2 emissions. As I already mentioned, the primary fuel of Energetica Maribor is natural gas, which drives the mentioned combustion devices. In 2021, gas consumption amounted to just under 23 million normal cubic meter, or almost 260 megawatt hour. We produce 204 megawatt hours of heat and electricity combined, which means 80% production efficiency. Through the whole year, 45 kilotons of CO2 emissions were emitted. Our production is dedicated to outdoor temperatures and the consequent need for heating. As a result, the production trend varies considerably throughout the year. Almost 3/4 of annually CO2 emissions were generated in the heating season. This means that the CO2 flow throughout the year ranges between 1.5 tons CO2 per hour and 9 tons CO2 per hour. Approximately 220 kilograms of CO2 emissions are generated for each net megawatt hour of energy produced. Okay, can we go now for the slide number 5? Okay, this is the current situation of CO2 emissions, and we have done several measures till now how to reduce the emissions. That means we try to optimize production and reduce the operating hours of combustion devices. We installed 5 heat accumulators, yes, 5 with a total capacity of 1,000 cubic meters. This saves annually about 14.5 gigawatt hours of primary energy, which results to 3 kilotons CO2 emission less per year. Okay, another slide, please.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. As we in the Energetica Maribor, we are aware of the need to take an accelerated step towards a sustainable method of production by increasing the share of renewable energy sources. We are working hard to achieve this. Above all, it is crucial to reduce natural gas consumption and switch to alternative energy sources. For this purpose, as I mentioned before, we install solar collectors and on the company's roof surface, with which we produce 60 megawatt hour of thermal energy annually, and we also reduce CO2 emissions by 14 tons. In addition to collectors, we also established a solar power plant in the form of photovoltaic carports with a power of 250 kilowatt. With them, we expected to produce around 280 megawatt hour of electricity annually and supply 154 member households. With the intervention, we lowered our annual CO2 emissions by 63 tons. And short-term measures, what we are planning. What we are planning now in the line to reduce the CO2 emissions. There are 2 more projects on the verge of implementation, which are expected to come to life by the end of 2023 or even earlier. We want to install a high temperature heat pump with a heat power of 2.5 megawatt. It would use the thermal energy of the river, of the Drava River. The annual heat production of the heat pump would amount to 13 gigawatt hour. Part of the electricity needed to drive the compressor will be provided by a solar power plant at the same facility as the device, 25% self-sufficiency. After the implementation of the project, we expected a 10% reduction of CO2 emissions on an annual basis. To reduce dependence of natural gas, we plan to replace one of the gas boilers with a wood biomass boiler with a nominal power of 5 megawatt. The replacement of the boiler, with which we plan 12 gigawatt hour of annual heat production, will mean a reduction of CO2 emissions by an additional 6%. And now what we are considering about the carbon capture, we are dealing with this idea for last 1 to 3 years. And we consider the possibility of implementing of CO2 capture plant on our existing production. We are mainly limited by highly fluctuating production and resulting variable flows of emitted CO2. This is one of the big disadvantages to introduce this carbon capture technology. Also, our production is locally separated. As we are informed, the current technology of carbon capture plants is not yet so far to allow efficient operation in such an oscillation in production. And for the medium to long-term measures, what we are planning for medium and long-term measures, how to produce the heat from different sources from renewables. For this reason, as mentioned just before, we are studying the possibilities of implementing the technology on another long-term and large-scale project of waste-to-energy plant. Because it will have a much more constant operation and consequent steadier CO2 emission flows, it presents a good opportunity for carbon capture technology implementation. With the installation of waste to energy with a capacity of 25 megawatt, Maribor could achieve more than 60% self-sufficiency in the district heating system. The waste to energy is estimated to emit up to 60,000 tons of CO2. And we are investigated the possibilities of using the most proven and using technology. That means absorption with amines of the waste to energy model. With this kind of technology, we can capture, according to the literature, around 90% of CO2 emissions. With the help of literature, computational estimates and consultations, we estimated to capture cost to range from 80 to 110 euro per processed ton of CO2. If we compare this figure with the previous presentation, it was mentioned from 50 to 100 euro. That means we are somewhere close to this different data. From one of economical point of view, such an investment would only be appropriate if the cost of capture were less than the price of the emission allowances. Besides that, this kind of the technology does not have more special requirements and results in efficiency drop of the reference waste to energy plant. And there are some limitations on the side and possibilities and opportunities on the other side. Uncertainty arises after we captured carbon. Article 166A of the Environment Protection Act in Slovenia prohibits the storage of carbon dioxide streams in geological formation in Slovenia. It was mentioned in the previous presentation. Therefore, the only option is to utilize or export the captured CO2. We are on the opinion that Slovenia would need at least one pilot project that would serve as a demonstration and test plan, which would put this type of technology on the threshold of Slovenian industry. Take the example of plant and existing waste to energy plant in Slovenia. According to the estimates of the Waste Management Program of the Republic of Slovenia, a total of at least 180 kilotons of municipal solid waste will be processed annually with these waste to energy plants. It is planned in Slovenia to build 3 such plants in 3 different locations. Therefore, these plants present excellent opportunities for implementation of carbon capture technology. And okay, for the last slide, we would like to say why we are thinking so, because there is a good example that we find in the literature. The good example of this is Oslo waste to energy plant, where it is estimated that in the future they will capture as much as 400 kilotons of CO2 per year. The captured CO2 will be transported by ships and stored in suitable geological formation under the sea. They have already proven that this is possible with a test operation. It is estimated that this intervention alone will reduce the city's emissions in the city of Oslo by 14%. This gives us optimistic view how we can manage to capture and storage CO2 from such waste to energy plants. And we will consider this issue in future, and we'll try to, because we are now on the beginning of set up such power plants, and we are hoping that we'll find a solution how to take this issue in consideration. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and you have any questions? Okay, we are ready to answer.
Thank you so much for your presentation as well. Any questions? I think we're quite behind, but maybe so to wrap it up. So maybe I could ask each of them, let's say, Tomasz, Lyubom, just for, let's say, a 20-second summary, or what would be one key kind of issue that you would, or measure that you would like to see from the government that would expedite your, let's say, interest or investment into CO2 capture? We've mentioned funds from for a pilot and demonstration project from the Climate Fund. Would you agree that's kind of the key measure, or is there any other kind of policy measure that you would put ahead of that one?
Marco, if I may comment this, for sure this, let's say, support, because we saw, and it was mentioned also in this last presentation, that at this point in time, this is not yet, let's say, economically feasible or, let's say, profitable to go in these technologies. So we need to find a way how to share the risk and how to make it possible. So this is for sure one important measure. And on the other hand, I think also some support and understanding that if we want to see some results in the future of these technologies, I mean, in the industrial scale, we need to speed up the process of permitting. This for sure we need to have in our minds. And I was glad to see also in the presentation before that this is also on the European level one of the key points that we need to address. Because if, let's say, we are just talking about 25 years till 2050, and this is not a lot of time, because some of the technologies will still need to test and then put in place. And at the end of the day, also, it's not feasible that everybody would do that in the last 10 years of this period. So we need to speed up with this process. I think, yeah, some, let's say, funds to support these steps, and also maybe discussion how to create these new business models that can, let's say, enable that the investor is not in disadvantage towards the competition. And on the other hand, all to speed up the process of putting these installations in place, and the permitting process.
Yeah, I think what is very important is that we have to raise this issue to discuss, because it's CO2 capture and storage is not very much discussed. And such a webinar is a good opportunity to put together all the industry that we are dealing with this issue. And I hope that the new government will recognize this issue as a very important, how we can manage the CO2 emissions. And this is only the one opportunity. And yeah, we have to join much closer, and we try to deal with different knowledge, experiences all around Europe. And yeah, we have to convince the decision makers to support such a projects. For example, pilot projects, some pilot projects, and yeah, the climate funds could be a good opportunity to support such a project, because, as we know, there is a huge amount of money not used for similar project. Yeah.
Marco, you're muted.
So, sorry about that. Yeah, I think what Lyuba and Tomasz said are good, kind of reaffirm sort of the key recommendations and the findings of the roadmap. You know, it's raising awareness, speeding up permitting, and securing funds for these kind of initial projects that would give something like long-term confidence for project developers to make these kinds of initial investments. So
Maybe Marco, if I may just add, because I forgot, and it was mentioned already today during the discussion. I think we need to also address the need of, let's say, over border thinking. We saw already that with the transports we have issues, but also sometimes maybe it's not wise to look for the complete solution just in one country. And it was presented with the Deloitte study that we are, let's say, positioned in a cluster that is positioned partially in Slovenia, partially in Italian side. So for sure we need to look in Europe for such kind of synergy and to prepare also the legislation and yeah, maybe bilateral, also maybe in a bigger group of countries, some solutions that can be developed together.
Okay, great, thank you. I think since we've extended this seminar quite a bit, I think it was great contributions from all the presenters today. I'm sure this is not the end of kind of the interaction on these subjects. I think in the next phase of the project there will be more opportunities, and also among stakeholders. I think we'll in the upcoming months we'll definitely work together at one point or another to continue this discussion going. So Michal, if you agree, I think we can bring the seminar to a close.
Yes. So I just echo what you just said. We'll be assisting you, Marco, and other stakeholders over the course of this year and the next one in capacity building and assisting in the early projects. I just want to share that me and Hanna as Bellona and with other colleagues, we saw the Oslo waste to energy plant just last week, and it's very impressive, and their plants are very impressive, and it would be great to see that happening also in Slovenia and beyond Slovenia. One thing to note, there is a massive governmental support both from the city of Oslo and from the Norwegian government in helping the company to deploy CO2 capture and plug it into the wider transport and storage infrastructure of the Northern Lights project. So let's hope we can replicate this project also in perhaps in the Adriatic Sea or somewhere onshore in South Central and Eastern Europe. And yeah, I think we can now close the event. Let's stay in touch. Once again, I invite you to follow the website of the project and the social media accounts of the project. Looking forward also to see you at the Brussels event in September.
Great, and
Thank you,
this
Marco.
will be made available to participants, so you can review it after today's event. Okay, great. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, for sticking out half an hour longer than suggested. I think this shows, that there is interest in CCS in Slovenia, and like I said, look forward to working together with all of you in the future as well. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.